you see the canyon?
No, that was the other thing.
Dude,
Because it was a 5-hour detour.
Oh.
It was a 5-hour detour. And I was like, I didn't
Maybe
even
on the
think
way
about it
back,
because I
you can see the
I'm
canyon.
hoping on the way back because it's closer to Vegas than it is Phoenix.
Yeah, well, and also if you've never been to Tucson, I recommend Tucson.
So, well, that's
Tucson's-
where I was supposed to go, but that gig also got canceled.
Okay.
So I lost a gig
Yeah.
in Dallas and I lost a gig in Tucson.
Tucson's a fun town, man. I recommend, try to get a gig on your way back. Yeah, it's a cool little scene there.
Well, I want to go to Vegas because I want to go, speaking of punk rock, the Punk Rock Museum in Vegas.
Yeah, I still have to see it.
I haven't yet. I've watched the tour online. I've been dying. There's nobody who's giving a tour that day, so I'm going to just have to do a self-guided tour. But I've heard from many people that it's so much better of a tour when you have someone you like giving the tour, like a musician from
that's
a
what I'm
band that you
waiting
like,
for,
because they
yeah.
just tell personal stories, and that's what you're listening for.
Right.
But again, time is not my friend on some of this. Better planning could have gone into.
It's funny.
I've
I've actually asked like some people I'm in contact with. I'm like, you ever gonna do a tour? And most of them just have no interest in doing that. They're like, no, I'm not gonna do a tour. I'm like,
I know
"Alright."
so many, and I've talked about this on the episode. So many people that I know talk about how lonely the road is, and I'm like, sounds like fun to me. I get to meet people. I get to talk to people. I'm very outgoing in general, so that doesn't bother me having the same conversation about people and asking them questions about them, or telling the same jokes and stories to
Yeah.
strangers over and over again. None of that bothers me, but I will say there has been definitely some times on this trip where I'm just like, why am I sad?
No, I feel you. You do have a lot of solitude, but that being said, though, I seldom, if ever, got lonely, and I used to just straight up live in my car.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would call my mom all the time. Like I talk to my mom. I mean, I talk to my mom way more than I do now, just because I had so many hours in a car, and also she didn't have grandkids at that time. Like so we're both a little more busy now, I suppose.
I've done a couple of those, like, Mom, I got a 5-hour car ride. I'm going to call you. What do you-
Right.
yeah.
Oh, totally, man. And then also, you realized how many people you know scattered throughout the country. And so for me, I would just kind of do a thing where I'd be like, hey, can I come cook dinner for you and take care of things? And, I had a lot of pets who always looked forward to seeing me because they knew, oh man, Uncle Ron's coming to stay
Yeah.
for a while. I'm going to go on as many walks a day as I want to because he's just going to take care of me while my mom and dad are at work. And I loved it.
I've been
I
using
loved that
sister as the
life.
opposite, just, convincing people, like, hey, I'm coming to town. Sister, my dog, who's named Sister's coming with me. If you want to hang out with her, can you book me on a show? Or do you want to just hang out? Or since I'm doing touristy things because I work in tourism now, that's the other thing, is trying to find, like, going to museums, science centers, taking trolley tours and stuff like that. So it's like, hey, that tourist thing you've always wanted to do in your town, but you will never do because you live there? Guess what? You can go do it with me if you want.
That's cool, man. Yeah. So are you kind of doing like some research? Like
I
for the
could be
day
doing
job?
more for the. Yeah, so it's part of
And then
this
do
is
they
to
do
be.
they pay for that?
No,
for you?
they're
Oh,
not.
okay.
I mean,
Alright.
I'm
Well, but
paid
still,
I have a paid vacation,
sure.
but not paying extra for that, and they're not going to cover the ticket prices to get
Yeah,
into some of these things.
but you should be able to write that off, right?
If well, that was the problem. Who knows with IRS if you're allowed to write off things when you claim a W-2?
Oh, yeah, no, that
Because they changed
kinda,
that rule at the IRS, but then they changed it
yeah.
back. But who knows with the current administration in there?
Because I do an interview style show as well, and
Yeah,
and
were you
it's
doing
like
what, 1,000?
1,000.
1,000
Yeah,
with Ron.
it's
Did you hit the 1,000 yet?
no, I won't hit it for about 20 years.
Oh, really?
Because I mean,
Okay.
like it's a kind of like a life journey type thing because I just drop one a week,
Yeah.
so it's like mathematically it's going to take about 20 years.
How are you finding people? Because I'm very picky on the people I bring on the show because I want people with interesting jobs to talk about
Sure.
as a way of get to talk about them and let the audience see who they are as a person. So I could fill 3 episodes a week, 5 episodes a week with everyone who's a barista and waiter who
Sure.
also does comedy, acting, photography, music, and all that. But I want to find the people that have something that the general audience doesn't normally hear.
Okay.
So how are you selecting your 1,000? Which, by the way, if you're going to go, I'll just pick up whoever I want. That's a fine method too, if that's how you're doing it.
No, it's a little more. So it's the thing is, it has to be somebody who has really piqued my interest in some way. Someone who, like, there's something about their story that I just find inspiring and motivating, and I want them to be on this show. which is a very broad concept, which is cool because like I'll have all kinds of different guests. But if you're into a lot of the things I'm into, you're gonna like the podcast. So like I think the one tagline I'm using now is just like lefties, punk rockers, journalists, academics, Ren Fair enthusiasts, rejoice, you got your fucking podcast. So and horror enthusiasts, like those are sort of like the lanes I occupy with this podcast. And my goal is that eventually people are just going to trust the curation and just tune in whoever the guest is. And that's slowly starting to happen. I mean, clearly people are picking and choosing, which is inevitable. Like Jello Biafra's numbers are a lot higher than somebody who is not as well known, which I accept that'll always be the case. But I'm trying to get people to really just, I want to know about this person. This sounds interesting, no matter who it is, and that's slowly starting to build. It's still a very new show, so
Yeah. Well, I have the exact opposite when it comes to numbers, in that some of my biggest episodes are not the celebrities that I've had on.
Oh, really?
I'll just say her name. She doesn't care, and she doesn't listen. I've had Jessica Kirsten on, and then very recently after, I had a friend of mine who was a doorman at a punk bar in Baltimore, and his numbers doubled hers. That's also why I can't look at numbers, because I can't. I don't have the mental capacity to look at it. So lucky I'm in a network now. They have all that stuff hidden and locked away that I don't get to see.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's the way to do it. I mean, well, they say you shouldn't even. I mean, these days when you log in, the numbers just like boom, like you can't not see them, because I follow the 2-year rule where it's like if the show is under 2 years old, don't even look. My show's under 2 years old. It is a newer podcast, so I was like, I'm not going to look for at least 2 years. But as soon as you log in, boom, you can't not see the numbers.
Yeah, they just bombard you with it now, because everyone needs those metrics now. Whereas before, there was nothing to do with the metrics. Like you could, to sell advertising back years ago was, if you're an independent podcast, was impossible.
Yeah,
you can try, but it was fruitless efforts, to be honest. Now, not only is everyone trying to monetize their podcast, but the platforms are monetizing you and trying to share the revenue with you. But literally, most platforms are just advertising platforms that just so happen to use podcasts to place their ads.
Oh yeah, totally. And that's why it's all free now, most of it. And it's an interesting landscape, but it's starting a new show. There's it definitely. I mean, it has humbled me, because it's like I closed my last show, and then I look at the numbers. Just hey, boom, reminder, this is new, and I'm like, God damn it. All right, well, hey,
Are a lot of your guests and people that you find interesting, are they people that you met in college going to Indiana University?
I guess
because you yourself are an academic.
Yeah,
technically.
In a past life. I mean, I don't really do anything anymore.
I mean, what did you go to Indiana University for?
I went to Indiana for, I majored in music business, actually, which I haven't really used. And then I did my master's degree at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, where my official degree was called Rhetoric and Philosophy, but it's just a communication. And I used it a little bit. I mean, I'm publishing a textbook, which is so random. But it's funny. I'm publishing a textbook because I did get published in an academic journal, which is like not the most uncommon thing for someone to do in their master's, but not the most common thing. I guess it'd be the equivalent of getting a TV credit in your first couple years or something. Yeah. But I haven't done anything since. But one of my one publication did appear in a textbook, and the funniest part was they had, how a textbook will have reader questions at the end.
Do they? I don't know. I went to 6 years of community college and didn't graduate. So
well, like you read a passage or whatever, and then at the end they have questions for you to ponder or write out.
Oh, okay. You've seen that. I thought you meant like user submitted questions.
No. Like just like number one, what did so it had those, and I saw it. Like someone sent it to me. My colleague sent it to me, and it said, "What was Placone inferring by?" And I don't remember what the question was. I just remember reading it. I having no fucking clue what the answer was. And I wrote the thing, but I was like, I have no idea what they're asking here. So I guess if any student says, I have no fucking clue and I don't think he cares, that's technically the right answer. You have to give them the A because you're asking, what did Placone? Well, I'm Placone. And my honest answer is, I don't remember and I don't really think, who cares? So they should be able to write who cares and get an A. So if anyone out there has ever done that, let me know, and your professor has to give you an A.
That is the most punk rock nihilist answer to an academic question. Is like, what was the writer thinking about this? I don't care. Move on.
I googled the guy. He doesn't give a fuck. It's the truth. It is accurate.
Well, what was the plan for this communications degree when you're younger? Like, I am now doing podcasts because I wanted to work in radio, which I did for 20 years, and then they decided they didn't want me. But but
no one
podcast
works
was
in radio now,
right? One of my good friends just got fired from his job, and he's I think 6 months since having a job, and it's the first time he's ever lost a radio job, and he's doing like a lot of independent stuff. But I'm like, I just want to tell him, I was like, you have an audience, you don't need them. Just
just do your own thing.
Do your own thing.
Yeah,
do your own thing. Get away from them. But he's too in depth into the corporate side of radio and how that all is organized.
Well, it's its own animal, and the people. I mean, I still have some friends that are still somehow able to figure it out. I mean, most of them move every couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, like just going job to job. I think you pretty much have to go to like a specific broadcasting school that can just get you in.
Yeah, and it's the jobs are fewer and fewer. It's a whole
when you're doing
thing.
the job of 5 people. I mean, yeah, we could
That's the
do an
problem.
entire podcast.
And that's
just
the
about that.
commoditization of radio because we're like,
It's
hey,
so
we're losing
sad.
money. Let's figure out how we can do more with less.
Yep.
But instead of utilizing the only thing they have, which is localization and developing new talent,
So
they can have a plethora of infinite employees that they can constantly run through if they would just develop new talent. Let that talent grow and big and move on. Radio was always the place where people were starting out. The most intriguing people were brought to radio. When you think about old past radio jocks, or when you look at the people, how many people started in radio and then moved on to TV, movie, and film and stuff like that. Corolla, Zach Galifianakis, Jimmy Kimmel. Those are just modern day people. Like look at the guy who used to host the Rock and Roll New Year's Eve.
Oh yeah.
Whatever
Okay.
that guy that everyone was like, he's timeless and ancient and he's never going to die, and then died.
Yeah, Dick Clark.
Dick
right?
Clark, yeah. I wanted to say Dick, but I couldn't remember the last name. But Dick Clark started
Dick
in
guy.
radio.
Yeah.
There's so many. Ryan Seacrest, if you want to call him talented. I think he's a vulture, but anyway, that's a whole other thing. He's the reason that we have the Kardashians, and I'll never forgive him for it. Anyway, the only person that should be more mad at Ryan Seacrest than me is Brian Dunkelman. And then if you're wondering who that is, it's like, exactly. That's why nobody knows. That's why.
Right.
That's why you should be mad at him, because he killed Brian Dunkelman's career. He was the original season 1 co-host of America's Got Talent.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Don't worry, everyone's forgotten him. I'm sure his mother has. Unfortunately, sorry, Brian Dunkelman. You don't watch the
Poor
podcast
Brian.
anyway.
I love. I actually, some of this stuff is stuff that I covered in my master's degree. Like I wrote about the Telecom Act, like very in depthly, and just radio as a local deliberative medium, and how that has so much value, and could have just evolved with technology, and radio could have found its place, I think, sustainably, and just for the sake of a community, and people still would have tuned in, but it just, I mean, instead policy just allowed everything to be gobbled up and homogenized, and that, along with technology, totally
Well,
killed
and the
it.
worst part of it is that you had these huge corporations that could embrace new technology over independent people, and they didn't. Like, I
Right.
remember pitching podcasts to iHeartRadio, and they were like, no, that's not a thing that we're ever going to do. Now they're trying to gobble
Did you
up as
send
many
them I
podcasts.
told you so?
Right?
I mean,
This
clearly.
was long before this.
Yeah.
The first pitch to them was the iHeartRadio podcast, where I interview celebrities about their memories of radio.
See, that's pretty cool.
It's
I'd
perfect
listen
for
to
their
that,
platform.
yeah.
They're like, no. They're like, podcasting's never going to take off. Now iHeart's trying to gobble up all the celebrity podcasts they can, because they think that is the key, is getting celebrities to host these podcasts and then pay a bunch of people a pathetic amount of money to produce them. But that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, dude.
But what was the game plan with going to well, obviously, it was started off in music business, and then you switched to
Yeah, well, that's just
communication
what I majored
philosophy.
in, and yeah, I mean, I kind of got uninspired by the major really quickly, but I got to do some really interesting stuff. Like I interned at a record label in Nashville, which was very very
What record
helpful.
label?
Dual Tone Music Group.
Okay.
They actually, so I interned there long before they discovered a little band called the Lumineers.
Hmm.
But at the time, they were doing stuff with Brett Dennen, and they were doing stuff with a guy named Carriot, who is still like kind of forged a good way for himself as a songwriter. And the other interesting thing about them was they did a lot of stuff with John Carter Cash, and when I was there, it was like right around the time Walk the Line came out. So it was kind of cool. I mean, I was like a 20-year-old, and John Carter Cash would show up at the office, and I'd be like, "Hey, man, I saw you on See Ed last night." And he'd be like, "Cool, Ron," and yeah, it was a good time. But I learned a lot about crafting a press release and publicity and stuff that helped me later on, just as a comic. So it was a cool experience, and then it also helped me as I was, doing stuff in radio. I used to go to the radio and records office on Music Row almost every day. I mean, the cool thing about Music Row back then, I'm gonna get to your original question, but as a sidebar, the cool thing about Music Row back then is everything was so chill. It was just a bunch of literal houses. That this is a publishing house. This is a music company. This is a record label. This is blah blah blah. This is whatever, and you could just walk in, especially if you were just some starry-eyed college kid, and you walk in around 4:30 in the afternoon, and you just go, "I'm a student at Indiana University, and I'm doing an internship at Dualtone," and a lot of people were happy to kind of talk about themselves and dick off the last half hour of their day. So tons of people were like, "Come right in and let me spit some game to you, like impart some knowledge on you, young starry-eyed person." So it was actually a really really cool experience. But um I went to grad school. I was up in Seattle. I was doing stand up. I was really liking it. Um and I was starting to get on the road a little bit, but I realized that doing the road out of Seattle was just logistically very very
Yeah,
difficult.
it's
And
way the fuck out in nowhere technically.
it's
Like if you're in the Pacific Northwest area, it's the center of it, but like there's so much mileage between like Washington State and any other major city.
Yeah, and you would do these things called triple runs, which Stanhope talks about them
Yeah.
and like a lot. And they were rites of passage. They were comedy boot camp. They were a lot of freaking fun. But
Explain exactly what triple runs are for
so
those who
triple
don't.
runs are comedy runs where you would go, you would have shows throughout the week, but they'd be scattered through Montana and Idaho. And a lot of times the routing didn't make sense because there might be a town in Idaho that really wants to do their show on a Thursday and another town, completely in the opposite direction. And they really want to do a Wednesday. So you just got to suck it up. And usually 99.9% of the time you would travel, the comics would travel together. So a headliner and a feature would travel together. And of course, starting out, I was featuring. So if you liked the person you were working with, it was a lot of fun. If you didn't, it was not fun.
Yeah. It's like
And
living with a roommate you don't like,
totally.
but
And I
in the
always,
same bedroom because you're in a car together,
oh
in a
yeah.
hotel together.
Well, you got your own room, but yeah, basically. And I always had positive experiences. I never had like a bad run with anybody, but you would hear nightmare stories of people, comics who would never ever speak to each other again. But I realized that was a lot of fun, but it wasn't going to be a sustainable thing. I also realized that I was still developing, that I wasn't ready for a ton of extensive road work yet. I was still kind of developing in the craft. So I kind of thought, well, what's something that I could do that appeals to me? And
By the
and
way, what year is this that you're in college and that you're doing these triple runs?
this would have been, well, I was out of college. I was out of undergrad by then, but I would have been, I guess, like 23, and so this would have been 2008, 2009.
Okay, yes, still that was like
Yeah,
the beginning of the comedy boom, the
yeah,
comedy bubble. So like 2007, 2008 area, just to like paint the picture of what you were having to go through. This was still the time where podcasts hadn't really taken off.
no,
Comedy Central was still kind of the king of the world,
yep,
but there was, not as many places to do comedy back then as there is now. And it wasn't as much in the zeitgeist. So I'm sure you're still doing shows for like 20 people that just have, or they're nobody towns where everybody in town shows up.
Yes, there was a lot of that.
It's hard to build a following. It's hard to move on from there because social media wasn't a real thing.
Yeah, it just wasn't a thing.
You just had email lists, but back in 2008, do you know how many people still didn't have email, let alone mobile phones? I think 2005 is when YouTube came out.
Right.
So we're still talking the first early years of YouTube where it's like, oh, Charlie bit my finger. Like that's the world. That was the world of media at the time.
Yeah.
Not clips.
Oh yeah, it was way different. Like you didn't put a clip online until you knew it was really polished and ready to go. Now, like comics will put their first open mic sets online, which I don't think is smart actually.
No,
but
it's not.
what are you gonna do?
But it's also like there's the mindset of we're in the mindset of any fame is good fame.
Right.
And also we're so much more leaning into the train wreck that is like the popularity of watching a train wreck happen. And people don't realize that they're
that
they're the butt of a joke because all they're getting is attention. Or they're getting likes and clicks and views. And that matters more than what their integrity is. Like that, I mean, this is a much more crass way to look at that, but the amount of look at OnlyFans. Or there's the woman right now who the British porn star who is trying to do 1,000 guys in 12 hours.
Oh yeah, I read about that. I mean, I'll say this. I'm glad I'm not starting out now. I think it's really, but the other side of that is it's everywhere now. I mean, back when I started, it was.
By the way, I do want to point out before we go into this, I am not shaming someone for doing porn or OnlyFans. She regretted, like she did 100 guys in an hour or something like that in 90 minutes. And there's the interview with her afterwards, and she's like, she's crying. She feels shame that she did this. So the proof is in the pudding that her own admission was that, why am I doing this? And then now she's continuing on and still trying to push the boundaries because fame is fleeting.
I mean, I don't know much about the backstory. I mean, I heard about this online, and that's as far as I go with it. Like,
and that's as far as anyone should go, is hearing about it on the so today in the news, and then moving on.
Yeah, and I was like, hey, if that's what you want to do, go for it. I mean, I don't judge whatever, but so yeah, it was just that, and I kind of thought, well, what can I do? And the thing I was going to say about how I'm glad I'm not starting out now, which I am glad, but the other side of that is there's comedy scenes everywhere now, whereas back then there were really only a handful of cities where you could really spread your wings and get stage time every night of the week. And then other major cities, they had something, but it'd be a lot smaller. And so in Seattle, those cities were Seattle, Boston, San Francisco, LA, New York, Chicago, the obvious. And then
you think about how new of Austin is to the comedy scene. Like 10 years ago, there was nobody doing, like, even pre-pandemic.
It was a lot smaller.
It was a lot smaller pre-pandemic. Yeah. Like I was in Austin in 2016, and the comedy community was so small and insular then, and now it's so humongous. In just a few short years. But I would be amiss if I didn't have to point this out. In that I agree with you. There's so much more comedy to do around the country now, but there's also, it's not as prevalent as I would thought it was, given that we're 2025 internet and how big comedy is. In that I've been in a lot of experiences now on this road trip, finding out that there's places that they might do comedy 2 days a week. There might be 2 open mics a week in a certain city. There are certain cities where they have 1 open mic a month. Like in Charleston, I did a great show at a new club there, Wits End, and I was talking to the owner, who's a comic, and he was like, yeah, we have maybe like 6, 8 comedians who are performers. Like they have enough material to actually
it's
and then they have 20 open micers.
Sure.
There's more comedians with backwards hat talking about how they shit on a first date to insert Dominus at an open mic than there are comedians that do comedy in Charleston, South Carolina. And I wouldn't consider Charleston to be a small podunk city. Like it's not.
No, it's not, but it's
it's a
definitely
population.
not.
It's a city. It's a
Yeah.
metropolitan area. It's not New York. It's not Jacksonville. It's not Orlando. It's not L.A. But it's not an unheard of place. So it was interesting for me on this trip seeing how many places where I'm like, oh, whatever. I'll just find, if I don't find a gig, I'll just find an open mic, and then looking up and there's no open mics.
No, I mean it's certainly not like totally abundant, but
I mean, compared to 20 years ago, you're right. Comedy is so much more everywhere
mhm.
for the common person, but it's not. It's still not at the levels that I would expect it to have been, given somebody who has started in Baltimore, Washington, does comedy in Boston. All three of those cities, I can do booked shows every night of the week.
Well, yeah, and
In
I
those
don't think
cities,
that was the case. I mean, like I lived in Nashville. Now Nashville is a huge comedy spot, and you can get on stage every night of the week, even just do an open mic. That wasn't the case in mid-sized cities like that even 10 years
Yeah.
ago. So yeah, I mean, it's still, I mean, yeah, in a place like Charleston, you might not be able to find an open mic any night of the week, but a lot of cities, it's really boomed. And so when I left Seattle, so I basically thought, well, what can I do? Like what can I do as I'm like pursuing this stand-up path? It's the only thing I really, really love. And the other thing that I was interested in was, going to grad school. There was other things I wanted to explore academically. So I applied to some different programs. One of them was actually in Boston, Northeastern. I
Yep.
applied to. And then I went to, but Pittsburgh offered me money, and plus I realized that doing something like going to grad school, it would be kind of beneficial to be in a place where you have family and stuff like that. Because obviously, like the graduate student living stipend is not much.
Yeah.
It's like basically a poverty wage. And but what was interesting then is I was still starting to build on the road. So I, really supplemented my income with road work on the weekends. And I would, and this was before Wi-Fi was freaking everywhere,
Yeah.
but I would write tons of my papers in hotels. I would like travel with my books. Like my trunk was full of whatever I was selling. It was usually just I think it was like some dumb CD I made or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd have a trunk of CDs and then a trunk of textbooks and then my clothes. And I did it. I did it for 2 years. And then as I was about to graduate, I kind of thought, well, do I want to go on for my PhD? And part of me did. Part of me really just wanted to keep going. But then part of me was really getting the itch to try to really take a chance at, the dream or whatever. And I very logically came to the conclusion that academia doesn't care what I look like on TV. Comedy does. So while I'm still in my 20s, maybe I should chase this dream and I can always go back. That was
And also in academia, the older and more distinguished you look, the more credibility you have.
That's the thing. Like all those programs are looking for people that have maybe had some life experience, especially depending on the program. So it just made sense to me to be, you know what? Let's take a chance on this dream and see what life has in store. So what I did was I realized my graduation date was May. And so I contacted every booker I could. Just every booker. And as we both know, road comedy is a lot slower in the summertime. But I was looking for work in the summer. So I was emailing, and that's also because it's slower and because audiences are smaller. That's when a lot of bookers would take a chance on newer talent. Because they're like, okay, this person seems like they might be okay for the rotation. I need some new faces. I need some new blood. Let me take a chance on them in the summertime. It's going to be a smaller audience because if they suck, I'll just never book them again. So all of that worked to my advantage because I was I had not had a huge road resume yet, but it was starting to build. I had some references, some headliners that would vouch for me, etc. So I, again, every booker I could, and I said, I'm looking for shows in May and beyond. And they said, okay, you freaking weirdo, you're looking for in the summer? All right. We have a few scraps. Here you go. And between every single booker I could think of, I had enough work that I knew that after graduation day, I was going to be able to be a full-time comedian for 1 month. And then slowly, after emailing more and more bookers, it was 2 months, and then 3 months. And then I realized I was like, I'm going to be able to be a comedian for 3 months after I graduate. And after that 3 months, we'll see what happens. And hopefully I'll be able to just keep stringing this thing together.
And you can do that in your mid-20s.
Well, and that was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
You can do that in your mid-20s, early 30s. Like, you're still optimistic. Like, well, I have plenty of time to figure out a future.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, like I said, that was 12 years ago. I'm still going.
Still working.
I'm still doing my thing. So yeah, I mean, that was basically how it happened.
When did, is the podcast a product of leaving the Jimmy Dore show?
No. I left the Jimmy Dore show. God, it's been years now. But I didn't start 1000 until
you said 2
years.
Years
Been a year
ago,
and change. No, it's been less than 2 years. But I think it'll be 2 years in September. I had the idea for that podcast back in 2015 because I interviewed a guy named V Val who is he created the zine Search and Destroy. And he runs a publishing house called Research Publications that's still around, and he's technically the last surviving member of the Beat generation because he was really young when it all started. So he's 80 years old now. But I interviewed him in 2015.
Oh yeah, as punks are aging punks ourselves. The punk rock's gotten old. Like, have you seen Bad Religion lately?
Yeah. Well,
the lead singer looks like Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's so sad.
He looks like a.
They're great live still. But
yeah,
they're also
still fantastic.
He's so great.
Yeah, well, he's just an aging punk rock professor, which is exactly what he is.
Yeah,
I would love to take Greg Graffin's class, but I've read one. I haven't read both of his books, but I read the first one, The Anarchy, Evolution, and World Without a God, or whatever it's called. Fantastic book. I recommend it. But yeah. So I interviewed him, and he said, at the end of the day, I strongly believe there's only 1,000 talented people in the world, or 1,000 interesting people in the world, and it's my job to document as much of that as I can. Which I thought, I didn't take that literally. I took it like kind of figuratively, as there's so much culture around, and the part of it that I really feel is worthwhile, I should document as much of that as I can, from my perspective and my point of view. So I thought, what a cool concept to just 1,000 different people that have contributed something to the world that I just find very important, that I find to be an important story, just interviewing them. And these interviews, I'm going to put everything I can into it because they're one and done. So anything I want to know, I better frickin' ask them because this is it.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a sense of mortality about it. There's a sense of like a life journey about it. But I thought of it years ago and never did anything with it. I had a podcast called Get Your News On with Ron, which was a fun podcast. I enjoyed it.
Didn't you do it as a streaming YouTube show?
Yeah, I streamed it. Yeah,
I remember watching a few of it because
cool.
I want to know what's going on in the world now that I don't work in news anymore because radio got rid of me. Yeah. I don't pay attention to what's going on in the world of news. I don't pay attention to what's going on in the world of politics other than, I'm watching The Daily Show more now that Jon Stewart's back.
Mm-hmm.
And also what the climate we unfortunately live in right now is incredibly...
Oh, yeah, there's some stuff
politically,
going on. Yeah.
Politically motivated.
Yeah, it's hard not to pay attention.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was a news and politics podcast. From the ultra lefty point of view, because I'm a big lefty. And it was fun. I enjoyed doing that show, and I had like certain issues that I really focused on. Like, I'm a big digital rights guy. I'm a big, movements, social protest, and union news and stuff like that. So I just focused on the stuff that I thought was interesting and curated it that way. And it was fun for a while until I just honestly got burnt out on it. Like, I got burnt out on the format. I got burnt out on all of that stuff. So I just didn't really want to be part of it anymore. And then simultaneously around that time, a network called Status Coup reached out to me about doing some stuff there, who I'm still active with. So, I still get to scratch my news and politics itch with them, but I don't get burnt out that way. So I still get to have a toe in that world, but I don't have my entire body in that swimming pool anymore, which is good. It's good for my creative energy. It's good for my mental health, all the above. So then I decided, all right, it's time to start 1000. So I finally just, got everything together and started it.
That's cool. Um, is the Jimmy Dore show? I know vaguely as a political comedy, or Jimmy Dore as a political comedian. I don't really know his stuff. How did you get a part of that show with him? Obviously, it's because you know politics, and I'm sure most of your comedy revolves around the politics, and that's why they brought you in on it. But what was the bringing into that? Because it was a TV show.
I'll give you the full origin story. So it all started in Pittsburgh, oddly enough. And this actually kind of dovetails into what we were saying about comedy scenes. So when I left Seattle and went to Pittsburgh, the comedy scene in Pittsburgh was a lot smaller than in Seattle. And I'm sure that's still the case. I'd imagine Seattle's a bigger comedy scene than Pittsburgh. But now, like Pittsburgh's one of those cities where you can get up pretty much any night of the week. And then I was there for a lot of that transition. I saw the comedy scene grow so freaking much, even in just the 2 years that I was there going to grad school, which was cool. But when I first got there were just maybe 2 mics a week, something like that. I was used to being able to get up every night.
Yeah.
So I would go to music open mics and do stand up. I would just, I kind of had to forge my own way. And there was also in Seattle, there were like 4 clubs in the area. Pittsburgh had 2. One of them closed. So then Pittsburgh had 1, and it was just an improv. And they really did not do anything to cultivate local talent at all. They had 1 open mic a month, and it was a very strict bringer, and it was just not a very welcoming place for comics. As far as I know, that has not changed. But so I was really not used to any of that, and was really kind of bummed out being in a comedy scene that was not what I was used to. So I tried to create my own opportunities, and I started bringing in comics that I liked. And I was able to bring in W. Kamau Bell right before he got his TV show. And the way I pulled that off was he was still doing a lot of colleges. I put the dog to sleep, by the way. He was still doing a lot of colleges.
This is her regular nap time.
No, he was doing.
That's why she itches a lot, because she has allergies. So we also give her. I also give her Benadryl every morning when we wake up and get wrong. She gets Benadryl, and usually right about after the walk, right around when noon hits, it's when she's like, all right, Benadryl nap time.
Brilliant. Love it. But so he was still doing a lot of colleges at the time, W. Kamau Bell. And I noticed he was doing this college like in West Virginia, about an hour outside of Pittsburgh. And I knew, I go, there's no way he's going to have to rent a car. So what I did was I emailed his manager, and I go, okay, look, I can't offer a decent guarantee. I'm just a comic in town. But here's what I can do. He's going to have to fly into Pittsburgh. There's nowhere else he's going to be able to fly in. I will get him to and from the airport. He can stay in my guest room for the night. All he's got to do is come in the night before. I will give him 100% of the door, and then I will get him to his college game the next day. And they said, yeah.
This is a very generous offer, sure.
Yeah, they just thought, like, why not? Like you're going to get a guy. So I was able to get him just on a straight-up door deal. I gave him all the door. So he made, he didn't make a ton of money, but he definitely made some money that he wouldn't have made otherwise. We packed the place. We technically sold it out. It was a small place, but we sold it out. And then I got to spend some time with him in the car the next day, driving him to his gig. But anyway, so I would do stuff like that. And I brought in a guy named Lee Camp. Lee and I are still buddies to this day. And Lee, one of the people in the audience, was somebody who worked for the Young Turks at the time, the online news network, the Young Turks. And simultaneously, while I was doing all this, I had a little radio segment that was being carried by a couple entities on the Young Turks network.
No word.
And so when I brought Lee Camp in, one of the guys who worked for the Young Turks came up to me, and he goes, hey, isn't your segment on, David Pakman and all this other stuff? And I go, yeah, that's me. And he goes, yeah, you do that Thoughts, Rants, and Cold Coffee thing. I go, yeah, that's me. And he goes, why aren't you doing that on video? And I go, I don't know, man. I'm just not good with that. And he goes, well...
And also, getting video on the internet was, even in the days of YouTube, was still not that easy.
And it wasn't that
many
common.
years ago.
It wasn't super common. But then he goes, well, I work for the Young Turks, and I feel like something like that might make sense for our network. And I'm like, well, if you're offering me to join the Young Turks network, I can start making videos. So
I'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out. So I got to join, this network that only had people in New York and LA pretty much at the time, and then slowly they got some other people from around the country. And I was one of them because I was just a road comic in Pittsburgh. But yeah, so I joined their network, and then because of that, whenever I did go to LA, I would get to do at the time, it's a much different place than it was years ago, much different. But at the time, they did all these other shows throughout the day. Like they had a space in YouTube LA, and then they had their own studio for a while, and they would do all these shows throughout the day leading up to the main show. So whenever I would go to LA, they would put me on like just various panel shows that they had going on, and that was part of my trip to LA. So I met Jimmy Dore there. At the time, Jimmy Dore was, a big part of that network, and he would just show up at like noon and just do every single show, including the main. So he would just be there from like noon
as a guest on the shows, or
as a panelist.
Yeah.
And then eventually
consultant.
He kept developing.
Contributor.
Yeah, and it kept developing, and then eventually he got his own show. There was a show that we all kind of ran for a while called Aggressive Progressives. Jimmy was the main host, but there were like rotating hosts, and I was among them. So that was how I knew Jimmy. And then, interestingly enough, this is so freaking weird. Not weird, but kind of fascinating. When I was a college freshman, I watched his 2004 special just as a viewer, and I like just watched his special. So I knew who he was for a very, very long time. And then so when I met him, I go, "Hey man, you're Jimmy Dore. I watched your first special when I was a freshman in college with some of my buddies." And he goes, "Oh, cool, man." And so then we just kind of knew each other. So when I decided to move to LA, this was in 2016. I show up in LA. I, had quit. Well, I basically had to quit the road. I mean, I'd been a road comic for like 5 years. Now I'm in LA. I'm kind of starting over again, not completely starting over again, but now I'm just going to open mics, whatever, trying to get to know LA. And one of the things they always tell you, look at all the calendars, and if you see somebody who go to their show. About a month after I got there, Jimmy Dore was headlining Flappers. So I went, and that was when his show was really starting to bubble. Like he was starting to draw at this point. He had sold out Flappers, and this was around the time the Bernie movement was really picking up speed, and it was just a sea of Bernie shirts. And I thought, man, this is badass. I like this. And he was trying to make his show daily at that point too. So I think he was looking for some people. And I said, "Hey, man." And he goes, "Hey, Ron Placone." I'm like, "Yeah." And I go, "I live here now, dude, and I would love to be more involved. I'm so excited with what you're building." So he gave me a shot to do panel. I guess it went okay. He gave me another shot to do panel. I guess it kept going okay. Then eventually he goes, "Would you like to start writing some for the show?" And I said, "Yeah." And then, the show kept blowing up.
The show was internet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a YouTube show. And it just, between 2016/2017, it just blew up because it was like one of the big shows, really amplifying the Bernie movement. And that was pretty cool. I mean, those were what our politics were, so it was awesome. And yeah, eventually it just morphed into not a full-time gig, but like pretty much a full-time gig. And then I started doing a co-headlining tour with one of the other regulars, Graham Elwood. And we went all
Palm
over.
Strike.
Yeah. We went all over the US with that tour. We did some stuff in Canada. We did Australia. So yeah, I worked there for a while, and then the show
were you working, since it's a YouTube show and it's 2016? Is there a studio? Is this
Jimmy
home base?
built a studio.
Were you working in an office or working remotely?
Jimmy built a studio in his garage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did a GoFundMe to raise the funds to do it, and he just started doing it out of his out of his house. And then he was also it was actually a lot because he was still doing stuff with TYT at the time at first too. We all were. So I mean, Jimmy was working.
And by 2016, Young Turks were on TV. They had moved from the internet to doing TV because I remember.
I don't know the exact timeline, but
Yeah,
it was either.
before I moved to Boston, my roommate, who's former military, would watch the Young Turks.
Well, they were on Current for a while, but that contract, I don't know exactly when that contract ended. I think there was.
Yeah, we're not here to go through
it's not
the details of the Young Turks.
But they were still. I mean, they were still a very active network, and they were doing more and more network shows. And so Jimmy Dore was going there at least once a week and doing the Jimmy Dore show. I mean, we were doing it 5 days a week. So yeah, he had,
from his garage with him.
Yeah. So he had like one day off a week.
Mhm.
And usually that day consisted of doing a lot of prep. So it was a fuckload of work for
Yeah.
everybody involved.
Sounds like
myself
a
included.
grind.
It was, but it was also a lot of fun, and yeah. So I worked there for a while, and as time went on, the show kind of changed. It changed politically. It changed just in the scope of the show. Like it in my opinion, wasn't the same show it was, and I just did not feel like I fit in anymore. So I quit. And what was your original question?
Well, I just wanted you to talk about getting involved with that show because
that's how I got
working
involved.
on that show
Yeah.
is interesting in the fact that he built a studio in 2016, which again, talking technology wise, wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy.
It wasn't super common. I mean, yeah, and it was also. I mean, I remember around that time, like a couple years in, I did the. I was a panelist, I guess is the right way to put it, but I was one of the panelists on what's that big festival that Flappers does? The
Burbank Comedy Festival.
Yeah, I was on a panel, and the panel was alternative jobs in comedy, which I thought was kind of a little. I'm not sure why I'm part of this because my job is still
comedy.
Yeah, like
you're
I'm
writing
a
jokes.
writer and a contributor. Like that's a very common job, but I guess because of the platform, that made it a little bit alternative. So I mean,
when
it
you
was
think
fun.
about it, he was able to do that without, and he did that on his own.
Yeah.
Like 2016 is the beginning of the era where you could start walking away from networks. Like if you wanted a TV show, if you wanted a radio show, if you wanted any form of a talk show, you had to go to a network.
Yeah.
Because it was impossible to try. Like, yeah, you could do illegal ham radio.
Yeah, no,
in hopes
totally.
that somebody finds it.
And that's been interesting to see.
know?
I mean, it's been interesting, and especially since Jimmy's a little older, so he really remembers that, and it's got to be kind of a pretty cool, mind fuck to go from you need a network to open a door for you to literally telling networks no thank you because you don't need them and you're better off on your own.
And you don't need, I don't want to say you don't need permission from anyone to do your show, but that's really what it is. You can do your show. And that was 2016. We're talking 9 years ago, almost a decade ago. And it was not easy back then.
It's still not easy.
Yeah,
in fairness, it's still not easy. It's easier to launch, but it's still
it's not
probably
easy to become
even
successful.
harder. Yeah, I mean, you might only have like 5 people watching you.
But just to take the time to build a studio in his home and have it as a professional environment as it sounded like it was, that should be inspiring to some people that are like, hey, I want to do my own thing. And you don't have, like, for me, as a kid in the 90s, I graduated high school in 99. I started college that same year. For me to want to share music, like I grew up with the idea of disc jockeys broke bands. And the reason I wanted to get into radio is because I wanted to be the guy that broke bands. I wanted to be the guy that brought people new music or music they never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I got into it 10 years too late to do that.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But it also was a mixture of of comedy, music, technology, and all that stuff for me. So it was the perfect platform. Radio at the time was for me. And I was always forward thinking. I started putting going to comic conventions and doing interviews. And this is how early in the Comic Con days that this was, is I would do B-roll of people in cosplay and they would just stand still because they were still so used to photos. So every camera to them they thought was a still frame camera and not video.
Wow. Yeah.
So I had to coach cosplayers on do something physically cool because it's
this
video.
is video.
And
Oh,
they're like,
that's so
I don't
wild.
ever move. I don't know what to do.
That's so wild, man.
Like
yeah.
I remember specifically just the guys in Predator costumes. They're like, "Oh yeah, you can put me on camera." I'm like, "Can you?" It's like, "Will anybody get it?" I'm like, "No,
What
it's
do
video."
I do now?
Yeah. What do I do after posing? But for me at 99 to want to get into breaking bands, it was impossible. And I mean, and at college we had an internet radio station, and I would bring local bands on to come, play their songs, do an interview. And of course, this was the days of nobody was used to being interviewed. We're all a bunch of little 20-year-old something nobodies.
Right.
The only microphones they ever sang into are broken, beat up, chewed up SM58s at the shit basement bar that they perform at. So we're in a nice professional, literal $1 million studio at my college, and nobody could listen to the show because nobody had computers in 99, 2000, 2001. If they had computers, they probably didn't have internet, and they had internet. It wasn't strong enough to just stream live audio.
Right. Yeah, you didn't have a strong enough signal. Oh, that's so funny.
And I'm pre-YouTube, so there was nowhere to put this stuff online. I would record episodes and put them on my MySpace, and I could only put 2 episodes up at a time, and then we could delete it. And all of it's gone because there was no way to keep that storage on zip disks, iOmega zip disks.
Yeah.
But I would do these things, and I'm a professional radio person. I'm a professional entertainer. I'm already emceeing things and doing stuff. I've already done stand-up, 4th grade talent show. No big deal. But I'm like, all right, everybody, I'm here in the studio with the band Misdirected. They're out of Baltimore. They're a couple of Essex boys. They're here. Go ahead and say hi, guys. Hello.
Yes.
Like they're so scared of the thing because they're not used to it.
There was a band called Misdirected out of Pittsburgh. Too.
Oh, it's a very common thing.
Yeah,
it's a very common thing.
You're gonna get to that. Yeah.
But the fact, but now everybody's so used to having microphones and cameras in their faces because they're literally in our pockets.
Yeah, you know how to give an interview. Now.
Yeah,
or I guess you kind of have to.
Or how to be a character, or at least how to like the few times we are so used to having microphones that we're getting to the point where we are refusing to do proper mic technique. Like the amount of TikTok videos that somebody holding a lapel microphone.
Yeah.
Or a lavalier microphone, rather. Even these things. Like Rode has made Rode developed, everybody now has made the same similar kind of microphones that we're wearing that clip on. They're small and they're built in and they're on one piece. But so many people were using it as a stick mic that Rode built a stick for you to put it on.
Yeah.
So they're like, all right, well, this is where the need is that people want to use it as a one-on-one microphone. So let's do that. Mm-hmm. Let's make something you just stick it on. And at least now it looks professional.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And we're still at the time where people were refusing to use those. I saw Snoop Dogg on a video on TikTok the other day. Somebody for Entertainment Weekly was interviewing Snoop Dogg with a tiny microphone. Not a lavalier microphone. An actual, looks like a regular stick microphone, a regular dynamic handheld mic, but it's the size of my thumbnail.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing Entertainment Weekly because that has become the trend, is to have the, hold a lapel microphone instead of wearing it like we are, just holding it up to your face like this. We know better. We know where they go. Every time I worked in AV tech for many years, if I've clipped one lavalier microphone on people, I've done 1,000. I've done and every person says the same things. Like, do I have to put it under my shirt? Do I have to do this? Do I have to talk to it? Whatever. Everybody knows what they are. They're well aware of how they work, but yet we're refusing because now we have to be, I guess, different somehow in this world. But
no,
moving on.
Man.
But
yeah,
rant over with. I promise. But we're talking about the 2016, trying to get even decent quality microphone. Like I can remember in 2016, the world of just recorders to do podcasts was an untapped market for tutorials because you literally had filmmakers who were doing YouTube tutorials on how to work a Zoom recorder, and the tutorial consisted of, here's the on button, you plug your microphone in here, you hit record. I don't know what any of the rest of this does, so don't touch it. And that was what you had to go off on for the most part to try and figure things out on your own.
I mean, I guess in the YouTuber space at that point, I mean, people did have pretty much
like 2016 YouTube was a little more robust, but even just the good quality video on the internet 10 years ago
Sure.
was a task.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's pretty. Now everybody has a webcam and
Yeah.
like some kind of web mic or whatever. But
Going back to talking about punk rock, because obviously you're wearing Black Flag shirt. You've been in punk bands. You go to punk shows. I grew up in it. I manage punk bands. I put punk bands on my shows. I still go to punk rock concerts. We were both aging punks.
Yeah.
And it's fun to talk to you about that because we're both living that style right now. Where we just joked about how some of our famous artists our favorite artists are aging. Some of them like yogurt in the sun. But you did a whole one-man show about being an aging, balding punk in Edinburgh.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, well, it was just an hour stand-up show, but the title of it was "Balding is Punk Rock," and it references one of the jokes in the hour. So it wasn't just about punk rock or anything like that.
But
it was basically
Edinburgh is that DI. Well, it's probably different now than you did 2023, so it's more corporatized now than probably when it really started.
Yeah, even 2 years ago it is.
The roots of Edinburgh Fringe Fest is that Edinburgh had a festival. They weren't letting people on, so people went, "Fuck you! We'll start our own festival," and they became this DIY
a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, and other cities do fringe festivals. The fringe festival mean, we're on the outskirts of that festival. We're doing our own thing over here, and now other cities are like, "Oh, this is the Austin Fringe Festival. Oh, cool. What are you?
It's like
fringing from? Like nothing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It just became a
term for festival.
Brand, really. Brand. but a beautiful one. I mean, I love
it. Has to appeal to somebody who has that DIY punk rock, do it yourself attitude. That festival. So what made you want to take your hour stand up show to?
Oh, I always wanted to do the Edinburgh Fringe. I mean, that was one of my goals as an open micer. Like literally one of the things I wanted to do was do the Edinburgh Fringe, and it took me a long freaking time. Just because there's always a valid reason to not go.
Yeah.
And so the years would go by,
and it's a month-long festival too.
Yeah. Well, you can do. I did a 2-week run, so
so
you can do a shorter run if you have to. But yeah, I just always had an excuse.
Had you been to Fringe before? Before
no,
performing, did you ever visit?
Before.
Okay,
I'd visited Edinburgh just as a tourist,
but not during Fringe.
Not during Fringe. So I talked to every friend I know who had done it to just be as prepared as I could be. But really, you're only going to be so prepared until you just go do it.
Yeah.
So I finally in 2023. I
walk through the process of getting into Fringe, because most people, if you're familiar with festivals, there's submissions, there's acceptance, there's organization.
Yeah, that's how it was.
Is it? Because I remember hearing it as anyone could go do Fringe. Maybe this is in the early days of it. The way I always knew Fringe is anybody can go do Fringe and be part of the festival. You just have to find the venue and do it. And they help you organize the venues. There's some organization to it, but...
Yeah, no, there's actually a lot. I mean, because there's 2 different sects of it. There's like the traditional Fringe where you better have 20 grand if you want to do it. And then there's what's called the Free Fringe. And there's 2 different organizations that really spearhead that. One is called PBH, and the other is called Laughing Horse Free Fringe. And there's some beef between them that I can't speak to because I have no idea why or where it goes back to, and have nothing to do with any of it. I just want to do the Fringe. And so I applied to Laughing Horse. And, you kind of tell them what you're looking to do, what your show is. You give them a range of when you'd want to be on. And I talk to other people to get guidance on all of this. Like ask for this type of venue, ask for this time, blah, blah, blah. So I did all that. And you send them some clips. You send them the idea for your show. You don't need artwork yet. Like initially, you just need like the idea of what you're looking to do. And then they send you an offer and they say, hey, we can get you a 2-week run in this venue at this time, please accept. And then you have to pay fees to get in the program. You have to order a lot of flyers if you want anyone to be there. And then they give you a media list and you just email anybody you can to try to
get on promotion,
get on their show, get an ad, whatever. And you just really try to promote the fuck out of your show before you even get there. Then
do you think being a road comic helped you become comfortable with the promotion aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta be. And so I did that. And then once you get there, I mean, you gotta, I mean, talk about like DIY punk rock stuff. You literally have to hand out flyers and
Yeah.
talk to people. And you're mingling.
You're barking. Yeah.
You're barking for
It's
yourself.
like New York. Yeah.
You're barking for your hour. And you're just saying like, hey, you know, like this is what I do. And I was just like, hey, do you like, you know, like this show's all about, you know, my take on things, my view of the world. I'm an aging lefty punk rocker in the U.S. and here's my thoughts on what's happening. And a lot of people kind of were interested in that because they're interested in what's going on in our country. You know, and then I had some people who knew me online who showed up, which was pretty cool. So I had like a mix of people every show, some of whom had no idea who I was, some of whom had been listening to me for years. And they're all in the same audience. So it was really cool. And I had shows where there were a lot more chairs than people. And I had the opposite where there were no chairs left, you know, and that's what everyone, I mean, unless you're super famous, that's everybody's Fringe experience. You have shows where there is just a tiny handful of people. You have, I mean, some people had to, my goal was to never have to cancel a show. And I did accomplish that goal. I had some small rooms, but I never had to cancel a show. And I had some full rooms too. But yeah, you got to give it your all no matter what, because one of those handful of people might be a reviewer. So you do not, you know, I know sometimes,
And
especially
the reviewers mean everything to Fringe.
oh, that means
People who go to
everything.
Fringe.
And you know what they are not into over there. Like let's say it's a small room, and so you kind of go rogue, and you kind of just start
Abandon your show
deconstructing it,
and
abandoning your show. You're gonna
doing
get
crowd work.
You're gonna get a shit review. That's not what they come for. They want to see your fucking show, whether there's not as an empty seat or whether there's mostly empty seats. They want to see your show. That's what they
If
came
it's
for.
1 or 100, do
yeah,
the show.
They read what's on the fucking flyer, and they want to see what you're doing. And so if you don't give that to them, fuck off. You just wasted their time. So I
It's
appreciate
similar to a
that.
play. Like if a play has a
It
small
is.
audience, you don't change.
You don't
play.
change the play. I mean, yeah, you can obviously. There's a little bit of, you know, like it's still stand up. So it's like you'll occasionally, you know, and especially my show was at 4 p.m. Some people might have just came from happy hour, so you still might get that drunken person. A lot of the times, heckling over there, it's out of enthusiasm, like they're excited. But you still have to handle it, right?
Yeah.
Like you still have to address it. So you're still doing stand up. But if you just don't give them your show, and you know it's 90% of the hour that you wrote for this show, not gonna go well. And I know people that have like kind of burned their Edinburgh bridges, or they just hate Edinburgh because of that. And it's like, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
Like if you didn't realize, you know, this isn't the late show at the, you know, like Podunk Club, Iowa or whatever. This is frickin' the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. This is what they do over here. And yeah. So yeah, I mean, I got to do it in 2023. I finally just said I'm not making any more excuses. And it was a blast. I wrote a big piece on it. Everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there was a little bit of everything. I fell for a housing scam. So I found out on my way to the airport that I didn't have a place to stay.
Oh no!
During the most expensive time in Edinburgh ever. So that was a mind fuck. But everything kind of worked out, and it was just such a wild ride that by the end of the first week, I forgot that had even happened. Like someone would be like, "Oh, where you stayed at?" And I'm like, "Oh, I stayed at this place." They're like, "Oh, where'd you get it? When'd you get in there?" And I'm like, "Oh, funny story." You know, like I just forgot that it even happened. I got talking about punk rock. I got to meet Attila the Stockbroker, who's an old punk poet out of the UK who I'd been a fan of for freaking decades.
Mm-hmm.
Never got to meet the guy because he stopped. He's a little older, and he stopped touring the States like around the same time I'd heard about him. Like his last tour of the States was like a year after I knew who he was.
Mm.
And
yeah, I found out. I mean, just on the slimmer of finding out too late, Mojo Nixon.
Like,
I grew up. Just Mojo Nixon was a lyric in a Dead Milkmen song, and then maybe 5-6 years ago, I finally looked up to see who this Mojo Nixon is.
Yeah,
and I was like, I feel that I cheated my entire life. And now what he does is not what I do in any way, shape, or form, but I respect a lot of it. And there's some of it I love, and some of it I'm like, I'm not going to go. That's too much for me. Yeah, because Jello Biafra is too much for me.
And I like Jello's a fun chat.
I get why people like him. He's the American version of Johnny Rotten to me. Not quite as bad as being a fake, but
I
Jello.
don't agree with that, but I see what you mean. I see what you mean, but I don't
he's
agree with
not
that.
as bad, like I said, as Johnny Rotten, but he is a little bit too much for me. Like when it comes to like the trolling aspect of things, like he ran. Like I'm gonna get the story wrong, but because I'm not a fan, but what I've heard is Jello ran for mayor of San Francisco.
Yeah,
and he had some really great points.
He
But
did.
then his other point was also at noon, all the business has to dress up as clowns and do a parade down Main Street.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there was definitely a provocateur element to it. He was a I mean, in the Abby Hoffman vein. No, I don't agree with that assessment just because I think for Johnny Rotten, really it is trolling for troll's sake. And with Jello, like he's a very sincere dude in what he believes and he has really been pretty consistent in his principles for 40 years and counting.
Yeah.
You know, Johnny Rotten is, supposed to be this countercultural punk who loves Trump and has a Sex Pistols credit card.
Is there? Okay.
So, yeah.
I don't pay attention to Johnny Rotten, so I didn't know he was a Trump supporter, but that's not surprising.
A little bit, but yeah.
So many punks have turned right wing, and I don't understand how. Like it was kind of a joke when Michael Graves did at first, like during the Bush era.
Isn't that amazing, dude? How can you
that was like that somehow didn't surprise me, but so many punks, especially ones that I grew up with, are Trump supporters, and I'm like, dude, we were the resistance. We were all fighting for equal rights. That's why we got together.
Yeah,
politically, and now you're fighting against equal rights.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, I think people kind of change. I mean, I could give an example with the T-shirt I'm wearing right now. I mean, Keith Morris, allegedly over the years, Keith Morris had said some like sort of anti-communist type stuff. Now, I've never seen direct evidence of it. I'm not saying it is or isn't out there. It's just like sort of grumblings I heard, but can't speak to definitively. What I can speak to definitively is a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago. I actually should have told you about this, but it's one of those things like when people aren't regularly in town, you kind of forget. But there was a South by South Bay punk festival in Hermosa Beach, and I went to it. They did some panels, and Keith Morris was on one of them, and he was like, he gave basically a pro-communist rant, like an anti-Trump rant. So I don't know, but yeah, I mean that whole thing is pretty weird. But
yeah, I mean the state of everything's weird now.
But yeah, like so Attila was I got to see Attila's show. Interestingly enough, we couldn't see each other's shows because we were on at the same time.
Yeah.
But he had one deviation in his schedule because he had another gig somewhere in Scotland that night. So I got to see him that afternoon and we got to hang out. Like I got to have a beer with him. He plugged me at the end. He's like, "Hey, see Ron Placone," which was like fucking awesome to me. Like I've been a fan of this guy for 20 years. Yeah, Edinburgh was freaking amazing, but it really just comes down to, I quit the Jimmy Dore show, as the pandemic was still in full swing. So I kind of quit not knowing what was gonna happen because nothing was going on. I mean, stand up was not even going on, so I didn't know what I was gonna do.
California really closed down a lot with this and I could see it from a distance because I did a lot of online stuff with flappers.
Yeah,
and a lot of comedians who were still trying to do Zoom things. I could see it through there as the Boston comedy scene completely shut down.
Sure. Yeah, I mean most of the country
like not even like doing Zoom, but what I mean as in like they didn't do Zooms.
Oh wow.
The Boston comedy went, comedy is dead and it's never coming back.
A lot of people felt that way.
That's how that town treated it. And
yeah.
That was surprising to me because I'm like, there was like one, maybe two community open mics on Zoom, but nobody was doing jokes. It was basically just a get together to whine about the world and the way it's in, the condition it's in. And I get that, and I did plenty of those Zoom meetups, and we're like, hey, we're just talking feelings and stuff.
Which
but
is
don't call it an open mic.
There's nothing
don't
wrong
call
with
it an open.
Yeah.
Like if I'm coming to the open mic and I'm doing jokes, don't look at me for being the asshole when
Sure.
you're calling it a comedy open mic.
Funny.
And you're saying it's the name of the in-person open mic you have. Don't look at me going, Dennis, how could you joke at a time like this?
I think some people, I think some people just couldn't really adapt to it.
Yeah.
But I actually enjoy the Zoom show. I mean, obviously it's nothing compared to the live thing.
No,
but
I used to refer to it as it was methadone for a performance addiction.
Yeah, I mean, my take is it as good as the real thing live? No. Does it have its place? Yes.
Yes.
Is it more fun than nothing? Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a freaking blast compared to nothing. So when we were in the pandemic, of course I did Zoom shows. Yeah, it's way better than nothing.
No.
So yeah, I mean,
But also, like, I'm a radio guy, so I'm used to sitting in a room by
Right.
myself making jokes. I'm sure sitting in Jim Dore's garage making jokes
Well,
amongst each
I
other
did radio for
kind of
years,
yeah,
too.
okay.
So, yeah,
you
I
were
mean-
prepared to be able to just sit. Like, all I did in my podcast studio was turn my microphone from here. If I was facing my mic here, I just turned 180 and had all the cool shit that I will look at to inspire me when I'm doing my voiceovers, when I'm doing acting stuff, when I'm recording stuff, when I'm doing podcasts. All the stuff that inspired me visually, I turned and put as my backdrop.
See, I didn't do that because I didn't want to feel like I was in. I still wanted to feel like it was a live show, more so. So
yeah, I turned it into a radio studio.
I didn't.
I already had
do-
the podcast studio,
Yeah.
so
Well, I have that too. Like I have
Yeah.
like this, like the little studio with the mic and stuff. But I didn't want to feel like I was doing a podcast. I still wanted to feel like it was closer to stand up than a podcast. So I had a little stage. I had,
you
and
were
it
one
was,
of them.
it was
You had
just like one of
fake
those
brick wall,
no,
microphone stand.
no, not that. I mean physically. I had like we had a little what do you call those things? Like you can kind of push them and you can kind of set a bar on top of it, but you
Like a podium,
not a podium though. Like it's a kitchen appliance, but it's
like
like
an
a
island.
yeah, like
Okay.
kind of like that, but like one on wheels.
Okay,
I have one of those. We still have it. We use it, my wife and I, and I made it my stage, and I just would have it, and I placed it in a certain place, and I would put the phone there, and because I like using my phone the best for Zoom stuff, for Zoom stand up stuff, and I would literally just stand there, and I didn't have like a mic. I know some people they had to have the mic in their hand. I didn't have that. My hands were free. But I would freaking do it that way because I wanted to feel like it was a show. And I will say, one of the coolest things about that whole thing was in 2020, it was an election year,
Yep.
which is usually when I would get college. I don't do much college anymore, but I would usually get college at election years. And
college tours of doing speaking
college
engagements,
shows.
college
And
shows.
well, and stand up.
Yeah.
And they had budgets that they still needed to spend in 2020. So what they were doing with all the agencies was you were getting 75% of your normal rate, and you were just doing it online. And it was freaking awesome because first of all, 75% of a normal college fee is still a decent
couple
amount of money,
grand, yeah.
and you're not spending travel. So it would be so cool. I mean, I remember my wife. The funniest thing is like my wife got home from. She was able to do something work related a particular day. I forget what it was, but she was able to do some kind of thing. So she got back from it, and she goes, "Oh, what'd you do today?" And I go, "Central Michigan University. What did you do?" And it was just so freaking cool. So that I enjoyed that. But anyway, I was kind of trying to ask myself, like, just during that whole period of what's next, not just what's next for the world, what's next for me, what's next for everything. And I had, like everybody else in LA, accumulated a nice arsenal of scripts that had not been sold, some of which had gotten a few bites, but no definitive yes. And I realized, okay, I'm getting to the point where I need to make something that is beyond a sketch. And I got to just do it myself. I mean, talk about aging punk rockers, man. I mean, I'm still a DIY guy at heart because I have to be. So
Right.
it's a good thing that shit was instilled in me when I was 12 years old.
There's sometimes I miss the DIY, like.
Well, what
like
do you call
making-
this?
Well,
What
this
do you mean
is-
you
well,
miss it?
I miss
You
like,
have it.
doing like imagine like doing like CDs.
You made me wake the dog up.
I
Your
would-
hypocrisy.
miss like the punk bands I used to manage. I would make little CD envelopes that had their record label or not, but their record label on it, like the cover of their album on it. There were burned CDs, 2 or 3 songs as a sampler that we would give out to people and mail around, and just like screen printing in my buddy's mom's garage, or not garage, but the kitchen table.
So it's evolved. No, I get what you're saying.
Making your own buttons and stuff.
Okay.
That's
so that specific part of
that's
it has
specific of the DIY I miss.
understood.
In
But
a
you
nostalgic way.
still have it. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
you
I
still
still
have
do it. That's
yeah,
why I'm
like this is all.
Yeah.
I feel like the whole thing is more DIY than it ever has been, and there's parts about that I freaking love, parts about it I don't. But either way, it's just the world we live in.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's like when I started, I built my first recording studio using a desktop, a boombox, dual cassette radio, and Wave Studios Sound Blaster program. and I had to
Yeah.
like this is 2000, 99, 2000, where
That's
I'm
so
going to my
cool.
buddy's bass player's aunt's basement to record them and trying to figure out how to do a multi-track recording without using a
Remember those days?
4-track cassette player, trying to do it digitally.
We would
And I'm
rent the 4-track. That's what we would do. We'd
Oh my-
rent a 4-track.
I didn't even have a 4-track. I had a computer and a dual cassette player.
Oh man!
And I did it like
and you would do the
just
overdubs.
figuring those things out back in the day. That was so exciting for me. Is figuring that and I love acquiring gear. I love testing these things out. I'm out of the world of AV tech, doing tourism now, so I don't have the desire to buy new tech or even watch reviews of tech. There's a great YouTube channel I watch where he reviews equipment. And I don't even care. Click. I don't even watch them anymore. I don't have gear acquisition syndrome anymore.
No, I don't either. I acquire what I need to do what I have to do, and that's So as the pandemic was looming, and I kind of realized, okay, what do I really want to do before I'm dead? Edinburgh Fringe Festival was on that list. And then I was like, I got to get something made. I can't. I'm not getting any younger. I haven't sold. I haven't made the big sale yet. And the industry is crumbling. So, I mean, that wave might not even be a thing anymore in the next couple of years, which in some ways it frickin' isn't. So, the GameStop thing happened in 2021. I got
the GameStop stock. They didn't short the stock.
No, they stopped people from shorting the stock. So I got this idea for a fictional movie kind of inspired.
Is that what Left at the Wall is about?
Because Left at Wall is about.
I know of it. I know you made this movie, and I know my friend Sarah is in it as well. So
yes.
it's I'm getting dual promotion of it from you and her because it's your movie. She's in it, and I'm excited to get a chance to see it. It's on streaming platforms now, right?
Yep, it's out.
It just came out last week or something like that.
A couple weeks ago.
January
24th it came out.
Because I knew I was on the road when it happened. And so the GameStop was the idea for the movie.
Yes. Yes.
What was the process of writing the script?
So
you said you've written sketches and you've done writing.
Well, I've written tons of pilots that are never gonna, tons of pilots, and then my manager at the time would try to sell them, and just the typical LA thing, right? And
it's because there's so much that goes. I get bogged down with formatting sometimes. That's one of my problems when I start writing something. I'm like, I got to make sure this is indent and it's right, instead of just
Final Draft does it all for you.
Yeah, I don't want to buy Final Draft.
I will now.
Well, I can now.
It's well worth it.
I can afford it now. But there was a time where I couldn't afford it. I was like, I can just do a template in Google Docs. And I've done that, and they're not. It's not the same.
Do that.
It's not the same.
Don't ever do that. If anyone writes, don't ever do what he just said. At least use Celtex. I think Celtex is free.
Yeah.
So
I've
least
done it in
use
Word.
that.
I've done it in Google Docs, and I get so bogged down with formatting. Instead of just write and format the evidence. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna. You know what, man? Someday I'm just gonna buy you Final Draft. It's gonna be like a gift. I'm gonna be like, Happy Holidays. Here's Final Draft. Just so you never say that again.
Nobody has to feel the cringe pain of not
because
somebody trying to 1 inch indent, 1.5 inch.
It's the most annoying thing in the world, and all that pain can be prevented. But I hear you. And then you always have to update it so they're always getting more money out of you. So it is annoying. I mean, that is annoying. They're like, hey, you got to get the most updated version or you're fucked. And you're like, okay, so here's another hundo. Man, Final Draft. So I get it, but it is worth it to me. After 5 minutes, it's just so worth it. But anyway, so yeah, I was living that life. And now that I didn't have a main gig, I was kind of feeling that way more. And so I got this idea after the GameStop thing happened, and I wanted to write something that I knew I could make. When people watch Left at Wall, you'll realize this movie could have been made on a phone if it had to have been. Fortunately, I was able to raise enough financing that I didn't have to do that. But if I had to, I could have. And it was written that way deliberately. The most complicated location is a bar, which, by the way, was at my favorite punk bar in Pedro, where I live.
What's the name of it?
The Sardine.
The Sardine. Okay.
Dude, if you have time, I'd love to show you around. Yeah,
I need to go back to. Unfortunately, Sarah, her show at Pike Bar, my schedule didn't work out with that. So I got
Oh, so
booked.
you're not going to be on Tuesday?
No, I'm not. Which unfortunately, well, I was supposed to be on it,
Right.
but it was the last Tuesday of the month, and then
she
this
had to
year beginning
switch.
they
Yes,
moved it up a
she had to
week, and I
switch.
already booked a show that night, and I can't get from that show to Long Beach in time.
Welcome to LA, man.
Yeah, and I was
In
like,
Boston, you could easily do those 2 spots, but LA.
I have to make that decision of who do I cancel on?
Yeah.
The friend I know, or the 2 people that I had to really convince to give me a show.
Yeah.
I'm doing dive bar comedy that night.
Yeah. No, I gotcha.
But also, I've done Pike Bar before, her show at Pike Bar, which is owned by one of the former band members of the band Social Distortion, which is one of my favorite punk bands. Also, I shouldn't have a love loss for it because the reason I wanted to do her show was for him, and I wanted him to like me. And I talked to him. He clearly hated me, so I don't need to go back and annoy.
Yeah, you told me. See, I don't know exactly who he is, but I mean, maybe he hated me too. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. But yeah. Well, anyway, So, I got that idea, and I started writing this script, and then I wrote a trailer, and then I financed the trailer myself. So we recorded the trailer. I mean, the GameStop thing happened in January of 2021. Our trailer was our first trailer. I mean, we have an official trailer now, but the first trailer for Left at Wall to try to get the financing to make this movie,
the proof of concept trailer.
the proof of concept trailer, was out in August of 2021.
Oh, wow.
Years before Dumb Money, everybody. I always need to point that out. We were freaking first. They're 2 completely different movies, which I think is why they never reached out to us. But yes, we were before Dumb Money. I always get asked about that. Yes, we were first. Just saying, we were freaking first. But yeah, so between a pandemic and between tour schedules and between financing and between team building, it took a lot of starting and stopping. It took a lot of disappointment, a lot of moments where I kind of felt like this movie's never going to happen. But finally, I got all the ducks in a row. We shot it in 2023, and it spent some time in the editing room, and then it did a soft premiere at the San Pedro International Film Festival in 2023. Then it did the Da Vinci Film Festival in LA in 24. And then we did some screenings throughout 2024. Like I did, because my cast was 90% comics, I did a thing where we would do, kind of like similar to the stuff Kevin Smith does, where we would do a show, like a stand-up show, and then we would do a screening of the film. It's not a super long film, so we can kind of get away with, doing like 30, 40 minutes of stand-up, showing the film, which is, just over an hour. So it's a very short feature. But yeah, and then we do a Q&A after. Those things were a freaking blast. I did one in Pittsburgh, and it's, like hometown premiere, so it sold out. Then there were a couple screenings I wasn't even at, like this film club in DC did a screening. Tucson did a screening, like a movie theater in Tucson. We did an LA screening at Flappers, actually. We did it in the main room. And we did like stand up ahead of time, and there were a lot of comics on that because like most of the cast is based here. So like, I mean, Pepitone did a set on that, Graham did a set on that, Sarah, Andrew Saxena, Anastasia Washington. We had a fun old time. Then we did a screening in Idlewild, California, which is sort of a personal story. My wife and I, it's a fun little mountain town, Idlewild, if you've ever been, Idlewild, California.
I only know of it from the Andre 3000 movie.
Okay, so they have this quirky little indie movie theater run by this really nice couple. And my wife and I just did a weekend in Idlewild, just like a little getaway. It was like when things were finally starting to open up a little bit, so we just wanted to get out of town and do something. So we went to Idlewild, and we saw this theater, and it was such a cool theater. It just seemed like such a cool vibe. And they were doing all kinds of quirky stuff, like on their event calendar and stuff. And we just really liked it. And my wife goes, when you finally get it together and make this movie, you should do a screening here. And I go, I'm going to. So when the movie was done, I emailed a bunch of theaters. A lot of them never got back to me, but I emailed them and I told them that story. And they go, yeah, that's cool. Let's make this.
That sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah, they were like, let's do it. And so we did. And it was a lot of fun, but also just kind of more the fun experience than anything else. Because like it wasn't, a ton of people just had no idea. And stuff like that. Like we basically just had to bark and convince people to come see this movie. But it was cool. We had a fun time. We had butts in the seats and we had a blast. And it was me, Sarah, and Andrew. that went up for it, and then we made a weekend out of it. Like we got this cabin and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And then I did a screening in London, which was super cool to just kind of see it on the big screen in London.
Yeah.
Well, so
let's start. Curious about for those listening who don't know how the movies and stuff are made. Where how did you go about finding cast and crew? Because obviously a lot of it is your friends and people you're friends with.
Yeah.
But, I've done a lot of the DIY projects. I've done the 48-hour film festivals, and
those are so fun.
You gotta find
if you're working with the right people.
Yeah. And if you're working with the wrong people, it's not.
If you're working with the wrong people, it's terrible because they're. So for anyone not in the know, that's where you literally need to make a film in 48 hours. You know what, man? I got super lucky. I got my entire wish list. I mean, I really, when I wrote The Bartender, I was seeing Eddie Pepitone playing it. And I was like, God, I hope Eddie will say yes to this. And he did.
Eddie's a cool guy like that.
Eddie's great. I'm
friends with his regular opener, JT Habersack.
Oh, yeah, JT's great.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of punk rockers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one why I'm friends with him is because, when I found out he was coming to Boston a couple of years back, somebody also reached out, is a punk booker. He was playing at a punk rock place with Jay Whitecotton.
Oh, yeah, he's so funny.
Where is he?
I don't know. I was going to ask you. I was going to see if you knew.
I keep trying to look him up on the internet. I think he's so funny. He's so funny.
All those original, what was JT's tour called?
Altercation.
Altercation, yes.
So when he came to Boston,
those guys were so
they booked me on it because he knew, the guy who did it knew I liked punk rock shows and I liked punk rock music. That's how I met this one punk rock booker. He just so happened to be the booker at this club that they did the show at, and I loved everything about what JT was doing.
I loved what he was doing too, man. And everyone there was so fucking funny.
It sucks that Boston has not worked out for him and he doesn't come back.
Oh, really?
He'll come with Eddie. That's the only way. But
interesting.
Every time he's tried to do his own show in Boston, it hasn't gone well.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, he can't get an audience out for him in Boston for some reason. But,
all right, that's random. But yeah, no, I love JT. I love what he does, and yeah, I remember that early tour he had. I mean, it was everyone was so freaking funny, and then like Kristen Levine did stuff.
Yep.
With him. Yeah, no, that was a cool thing.
Funny listening to his road podcast while listening at the same time. I was listening to Tuesdays with Stories with Mark Norman and Joe List.
Okay.
And I don't know why I listen to them anymore. Every time I listen, I turn it off.
I'm not familiar.
I'm unfamiliar with them. I've unfollowed them. It's just de-evolved into like nothingness. But
all right,
it was funny listening to those podcasts at the same time because you had here JT going documenting his life on the road at like sleeping in the car, staying at shitty $20 motels where there's crackheads arguing and fighting outside of your door all night long.
Yeah.
And then listening to them at the same time, Mark Norman and Joe List, who at the time were opening for the two biggest comedians in the world, Louis C.K. and Amy Schumer.
Oh, interesting.
And listening to them as openers get, steak dinners, going across Europe, being treated like celebrities and kings, while this other guy is like, yeah, so I didn't sleep at all last night because we had to get out of the hotel because there was roaches. And just like,
wow. Yeah.
That's the world I saw more for me than I did that.
Me too.
Mark Norman and Joe List did, unfortunately.
That's more of the world I still see, dude.
Yeah. But I mean, I would revel in being in the opener for the biggest comedians in the world, getting to travel everywhere and getting treated like royalty. But I think my real future is more what JT was going through.
Me too. And that's been my
on this tour. I've accepted that I'm not accepting any hotel that's not a Marriott.
There you go.
And that's me being bougie because I have the money to be bougie because I make a good living at Boston Duck Tours.
So there you go. No, dude. I mean, I these days I like to kind of split the difference. Like I don't mind road dogging it. But yeah, like a reasonable hotel. I don't need a lot, but a reasonable hotel. And I'd like to. I
love a free breakfast.
I'd like to be in your free breakfast. Well, that's economical, really, man. Because you make that free breakfast last throughout the day.
$50 at
I won you
Best
over,
Western,
by the way,
or
which I'm really glad
$100 for a Marriott with a free breakfast. I can spend that extra $50 and get a couple of meals out of the Marriott and the comfort.
I did not want to go down as the guy who just said, "Hey, don't lick your asshole" to the dog. Like, oh, that's the don't lick your asshole guy. No, I'm also the treat guy who's giving you all the pets and scratches you need. I'm also that guy. But yeah, so I really wanted Gareth Reynolds to play the main character's brother. And I was anticipating that I was probably going to play the main character. I wasn't married to that idea. I just realized, I'm like, look, you're going to have to try to be as economical as you can. And if you can afford not paying one lead, i.e. yourself, you're gonna have to do that.
Yeah.
So so that Ron Placone asshole worked for free. What an idiot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I sent the first draft of the script to Gareth, and I'm like, hey man, I got this idea. Would you be interested? And he was like, this sounds fun, dude. I'm in. And especially with the way the world's going, who knows? He's like, I'm pretty open right now. And fortunately, in 2023, he was still down to do it, even though he was a lot busier. But yeah, I got.
Well, he was still doing that. Wasn't he doing a podcast with Greg Barron at the time?
Dave Anthony. They do
Dave
the
Anthony.
dollop.
Dave Anthony. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, they do the
That
dollop.
I keep
And Dave Anthony's in the
Dollop.
movie too.
Oh, is
So
he?
there's a fun little Easter egg for dollop fans.
Yeah,
in the
there's
if you're a fan
Cy
of the dollop.
Amundsen and Gareth Reynolds. I often conflate the two of them
Oh, okay.
because only associate both of them with their podcast partners.
Yeah, well, he's got a really cool new podcast with I think Jake Johansson, Gareth does.
Yeah, where they take phone calls.
It's really funny. I've only listened to it once or twice, but it's really, really funny. And him and Dave have another podcast
the Dollop,
as
and
well.
that is blown up.
Well, the Dollop's huge,
Yeah.
but they have
And
another
also,
one.
I found out who Gareth Reynolds was because he did a podcast with Greg Barron,
Oh,
Walking
okay.
the Room. Greg
Okay.
Barron's one of my favorite comedians, so I follow everything
I
Greg
thought,
does.
I
And
thought
he's
Dave did that. But it was Gareth who did that?
no,
Well,
no,
anyway,
yeah, no,
yeah.
no. I found out Gareth through Dave. I found Dave through Greg, who
Gotcha.
did Walking
Okay.
the Room with
Yeah,
Greg
so I was
Barron.
going to say, I thought Dave did
Yeah.
Greg's.
I learned who Dave Anthony was because
yeah.
of him doing a podcast.
I love Dave.
Greg
I
Barron.
mean, I love both those guys. I mean, I love Dave, and full disclaimer, like I've written for the Dollop, so I'm going to be biased, but yeah, I love what those guys do.
No, I'm happy for him. Like that podcast has blown up so big.
It's such a cool podcast.
Yeah, it's a
such
great
cool
concept. I listened
podcast.
to it in the early years and then just kind of fell out of it just because for no reason other.
Sure,
I think
yeah, I mean,
probably what
sometimes you
happened. I got a
just-
car at the time, and when I got a car, when I own a car, I listen to less podcasts
I feel you.
because when I'm taking public transit, when I'm taking the subway, the T in Boston,
Yeah.
I listen to podcasts because everywhere I have to go is a half hour to an hour and a half.
Right.
Whereas in a car, it's a 10-minute drive.
Oh, well, not right now, but I guess in other circumstances that's the case for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got lucky that, and then I also, the things that I needed to fill, I kind of just put feelers out there.
Which I can imagine it's easier in LA to find a sound mixer, boom bob.
Oh yeah. Building the team is a lot easier in a place like LA. But what I also did was, I had made a little pilot called Loner that was just a complete like done on a trade, and everybody was just getting paid in some pizza and beer.
Pizza beer and an IMDb credit.
Yes, exactly. And it was just like a friends thing. Like I'm like, hey, this is just a passion project, but the concept of it was it was a guy going through the pandemic, so every single role except for me was a VO. So it was really easy to just be like, hey, you just gotta come give these lines. You don't need to memorize them or anything, and there's gonna be pizza later. So it was easy to get people to like kind of just come out and hang out, But some of the people that did Loner, I was like, hey, I'm trying to do this other thing. It's a feature film. It will be paid, and you will get kind of first dibs on anything I have. And so I think Sarah was the only person that actually took me up on it. But yeah, Sarah was in Loner, and then she was in Left at Wall at Left at Wall as well. And now we're actually working on another film together that's also going to be launching as a stage play.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's going to premiere at the Hollywood Fringe in June. So anyway, but yeah, so I was able to get my kind of wish list of everybody, including some of the remote roles, because the way we do the movie is like he's on Zoom calls and stuff like that. Because again, we were thinking if we need to make this with a phone, we will. So some of our cast members. We have some of our cast lived in Ireland. Some of our cast lived in England. Some of our cast lived in Pittsburgh. So that was like a really cool thing too. What I literally did was I used StreamYard, and we would just go through the scene on StreamYard, which is just a streaming software program, kind of like Zoom for anyone who doesn't know. And then when I was with the DP later, we just spliced it in. Like I had a reader, and I would just do the scene that way, and then we would splice the actual recorded stuff in post. And,
we did during pandemic. We a friend of mine. I helped him. I did audio for his. He tried to do short called Candemic, where it's
interesting.
It's a werewolf on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of Zoom experts get together on Zoom to try to devise a plan for this now uh, burgeoning werewolf pandemic. But there's a lot of people who are denying that werewolves are real, and the thing is supposed to be an allegory for the COVID.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
I would have loved to do it on Zoom, but he wanted to do it on Jitney or whatever this free version of Zoom was.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah,
All
it
right.
was JitChat or something like that, and it was just like, bro, I will pay for the Zoom license, please. Just let's do it on Zoom. It's so much. Because then what I'm doing is not taking the Zoom audio, I'm screen recording and taking his Zoom footage. So I had 2 copies of everything. Editing some of the clips together. I ended up taking over a video editing role because the guy who was editing it was taking too long. So I was like, just let me do it. You know, I've recorded the audio already. Just you're gonna have to turn it over to me to do the sound editing, or I give him the soundtrack. And last time I did sound for you, and you gave my files to somebody else. He fucked up all the audio editing.
Yikes.
Like there was points where it was like bad audio cuts and stuff, and it's like different volumes and
Yeah,
the editor wasn't an audio mixer. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
So I get that. Hey, let's just record this and use the video, the online video footage and splice it in. So that's I'm empathizing with you on good job figuring that out instead of having to like do it a different way.
Yeah, there was a lot of trial and error throughout, but yeah, I mean, we just slowly but surely got it done, and then yeah, I mean, it the most intense thing was just the distribution process. That was
I imagine, yeah,
because I didn't know if we were going to get distribution. Like it's like my first movie. I had no expectations other than just I want to do this and I want to just get it out there the best I freaking can.
Well, what was the plan for getting distribution? Was it solely relying on festivals and hoping somebody comes out?
It was like the same way. Like, how do you find a record label to put out your music? You know, like it was just a combination of festivals, screenings, and just cold emails. And you know what ended up working? Cold emails. They actually do go through submissions, and you know, like we ended up a distributor got back to us, and we're like, a couple did actually. We had a few offers, and I just took the first one. So I didn't even like I got other ones, and I didn't even I was like, oh shit, I already said yes. I mean, I don't know if this is better or not, but I mean, they looked all about the same, but yeah. So we just, I mean, I got an offer, I took it. You know, I mean, I read through it, but then I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take it. You know, it seemed pretty standard, and based on everything I had read, it's like this is.
Well, going to the plan, because I've been a part of certain things that have been submitted, and one of the problems that I've always seen with festivals is so many of them, their stipulation is you can't release it yet. Like it can't be submitted.
They're weird about that. Yeah,
it can't have couldn't have been featured at another festival. Like you can show it at a smaller, less. It can't be like the main video of other things. So was going through the festival submission process. How did you decide which festivals to submit to?
Well, there's a resource called Film Freeway, and they just kind of have an extensive list of festivals, and you just kind of like go through them and use your judgment the best you can. I mean, in my experience, it's a lot like the comedy festival world, where a lot of them are bullshit that will do nothing for you. Some of them are kind of cool. And you just try to figure out what's which. I mean, obviously, I have more experience in the comedy world than I did in the film world, so there was a little more, again, trial and error. But I just applied to the festivals that I thought would be, A, good fit for the film, and B, just kind of fruitful. And I just answered the questions honestly. I mean, we hadn't done a ton of festivals, so it was pretty much like a new thing. But yeah, some places they were like, well, if it's screened anywhere, you can't apply. And I'm like, all right, well, that's freaking ridiculous.
Right.
You know, like for us, it was like, it made sense to launch at the San Pedro International Film Festival because that's the hometown festival. It was all shot in San Pedro where I live. So it just makes sense to do it there. And also, I got to see it on the big screen at the Warner Grand, which is one of the oldest movie theaters in the freaking country. It's one of the original Warner Brothers theaters, and it's the only one that's still standing. And it's right in my neighborhood. So, that was a sort of once-in-a-lifetime type thing, just seeing it on that screen. I'll probably never see anything I make on that screen ever again, because right now it's not even, like, they're refurbishing it. It's not going to be open again until 2026. So that was awesome. Seeing it there and seeing it launch there and seeing my friends there and seeing some of the cast there and whatnot.
Yeah, for me, that's the Senator Theater in Baltimore City. That's the heritage old-timey theater.
It's a special thing, and even just like, you know, my parents and family were able to see my movie on the big screen, you know, in Pittsburgh, and you know, I mean, that's a special thing, and so yeah, man, it's a big climb, but it's one of those things where now I'm real excited for the next one because a lot of the trial and error periods I had during the first one, I'm not going to have that this time because I've done it before, you know, and I just I know a little bit more about what to expect. So, but yeah, Left It Wall is out now. You can see it on Apple TV, you can see it on YouTube Movies, you can see it on Google Play, you can see it on Amazon. Yeah, check it out, rent it. You can buy the DVD. And if anyone is not sure which platform they want to use, you can just go to my website, ronplacone.com. It shows all the ways you can watch it. But yeah, you should just type in Left It Wall on your smart TV and it should come up. It's on a bunch of like the cable on demand things. So depending on where you live, you know, it's easy to get. But yeah, the big ones are the Apple TV, Amazon, YouTube Movies.
RONPLACONE.
Yep, Ron Placone. RonPlacone.com. The movie is Left at Wall.
And where else, other than Left at Wall, where can everybody find more about you and your comedy?
I'm on Instagram. I'm still on Twitter, but I'm also I'm on Twitter. I mean, I don't know. Eventually, I got to get off, but I'm still there. Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. I'm not great at TikTok, but I am on it. But yeah, I'm just Ron Placone on every platform. So Ron Placone, any platform, well, almost anyone. I'm not on Snapchat, but Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, Ron Placone. And then ronplacone.com is my website. Left at Wall is my movie. Please do check it out. And I'm going to be doing more festival stuff this year because I'm launching a stage play with Sarah.
Yeah.
And then another Andrew Saxon, us, like the three of us. And then my friend Michael's going to produce us. But yeah, so we're going to be launching that in Hollywood, and most of my road stuff is going to revolve around that. So I won't, as of February, I actually don't have any tour dates really. So which is atypical, but yeah, all the touring is going to happen later in the year because of that play. But yeah, ronplacone.com to follow
and they can
everything.
go see the play when you are in their town with their play.
Exactly. So ronplacone.com for everything.
This is great.
This was great, dude. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me. I love your dog.
Poke some holes in the tide.